Hello, I'm Ed Soane from the Charter School North Dulwich, and I'm going to talk to you briefly today about live marking, marking more effectively. So in this session, I will start off talking about marking and feedback, what current practice looks like, and then I'm going to move on to live marking, and then we'll move finally on to an experiment around live marking and what we found when we undertook this. So here's a little bit of a task for you to do. Grab yourself a piece of paper and a pen, and then can you pause the video and then say, write down what was the last piece of work that you marked? What did you do? Why did you do it that particular way? And how did the students respond? And then finally, how long do you think it took you? So pause the video, answer those questions, note them down, and we'll come back to that afterwards. Just going to take a little quote from a marked improvement from the EEF. The quality of existing evidence focused specifically on written marking is low. This is surprising and concerning, bearing in mind the importance of feedback to pupils' progress and the time in a teacher's day taken up by marking. Few large-scale, robust studies, such as randomized controlled trials, have looked at marking. So maybe some of the things that you wrote down before about why you marked in a particular way comes to this, a marking policy. Your school will probably have a marking policy, but what is it? And more importantly, what is it based on? How was it developed? Maybe all these things are linked together. Maybe it's evidence-based, maybe it's not. So if you don't know your school's marking policy before we go forward, take a time to find that. Just another note, from a 2016 review on teacher workload, it is suggested that providing written feedback on pupils' work has become disproportionately valued by schools, and the quantity of the feedback has too often become confused with the quality. I know if I looked at that activity from before about what was the marking I did, many times I've spent a long time marking, writing things down. Sometimes the students don't even respond to it. Sometimes I don't necessarily know why I've done that. I've perhaps done it for the sake of, because I feel I should mark rather than the benefit of the students. Which leads us on to the next part, which is live marking. I draw your attention to this piece of work by teachers at Charles Dickens School, Mark Less, Mark Better. There's information on it at the end. And I was introduced to this and live marking, and it comes on the back of that EEF report. They looked at detailed written marking, and it didn't have the impact on pupil outcome. Well, it wasn't proportional to the time and effort it took. Sometimes teachers were going through the motions marking because they thought they should do, due to the demands of senior leaders or Ofsted. They found the most powerful feedback was given to students at the point of the work being done, which basically is the live marking. So live marking, feedback is given to pupils as close as possible to the point at which the work was done. By doing this, it transfers responsibility for assessment away from the teachers, but the timing of the feedback is moved away from after school, in your own teacher time, in your own home time, to in the classroom, on the day, at the time the work is done. I'll give you an example of how I would do it. For the live marking task, I've set an independent task for students to do, maybe about 10-15 minutes. And during that time, you just go around the class as you normally do. You circulate and you assist students with those questions. You help them out. But when you're doing it, you're making notes directly onto the book, and you only mark during the time that they're doing the questions. You're not taking anything home, you're not marking afterwards. But when you're doing it, students can respond immediately to what you're doing. You see something going wrong, you can help them fix it, and they can respond to that immediately. Here's an example of some of the questions I might do. I'm a secondary science teacher. Obviously, these would be for, say, a year 10 class. You just get students to have to write their answers to the questions in your book, and then you go around. If you do 5 students a lesson, over the course of 6 lessons, you've marked the whole class, which would be in line with my school's marking policy. The questions are quite short, and there are different things for students to do, some calculations, some just written work, but allows you to see where they're going wrong and easily respond. So that task you did earlier, if we apply it to the live marking scenario, what was the last piece of work you marked? The last piece of work we marked would have been the work the students were doing immediately in the class. What did you do? I responded to their issues. I looked at what they were doing. If they were having trouble with a question, I helped them do it. And why did I do it that way? Because they were stuck. It was just purely responding to the students' needs. And how did they respond? They corrected their work, or if they were having trouble doing a calculation, they were then able to do the calculation afterwards. And how long did it take? Well, it took a minute or two in the class, but it took no time outside of the lesson. It just took the lesson time. So outside lesson, 0 time. But is this a way forward? So the next part is talking about a DFE workload project I was invited to take part in, and it's about how to reduce teacher workload. And it is a teacher-led randomized controlled trial. And the DFE asks many different schools to participate, and you are invited to come up with your own ideas on how to reduce teacher workload, but do it in a proper data-led meta-analysis with randomized controlled trials. And we did it with live marking. We started with a group of year 10 students. Half the students were marked in line with the school's normal marking policy, and the other half were marked live, with the live marking where you circulate around the class and answer their questions then. So the original were control, and the live marking are the intervention. The students were tested before and after. And then once all that information was collected, we case matched non-randomized gender pairing comparison. So we took the students, and the students who are most similar to each other on the control and the intervention, we paired them up, and we looked at their scores before and after, and how they improved or didn't improve, and what were the overall effects of live marking compared to normal marking from the class. Here's a table of what it might look like. We matched them up by their key stage average point score, as well as looking at their current reading age. Overall, for the result, it was non-significant. There was a slight positive impact, so a non-significant positive overall impact. So live marking, non-significant, didn't really have an effect on them if we take all of the students involved. Actually, when we broke it down to gender, girls, it did have a significant effect for them, a positive effect. It did help them. Boys was a non-significant negative effect. So that means we reduced the marking and feedback outside the class, and it had no detrimental effect on the students' progress. The students made as much, or in some cases more progress than they would have if we were writing their book after the lesson and writing lots of feedback. If they received no formal written feedback, their grades didn't suffer, and girls actually saw an improvement in their grades. That was because perhaps the girls were able to respond immediately and fix their mistakes in class and then learn from it straight away, rather than when you write in their book a week later, they may not look about it, or they may have forgotten about what it was they were doing. So the feedback didn't really have the impact that you'd hoped. So what do we learn from this? If you do live marking, students can react to the feedback immediately. Whilst their brain is engaged with the task, they know what it is they're supposed to be doing, and then they can correct it. They can correct and learn from those mistakes. So there's no disconnection between the marking and the work and everything they do. Teachers save a lot of time marking outside the lesson by doing it live. But it will only work with some tasks, not necessarily all. It works very well for a science lesson, but maybe there are some tasks it wouldn't work for. Okay, thank you. I'd like to draw your attention to some things that you should perhaps look at to support some of the things I've been saying. Thank you.